Good morning, everyone. I hope you all have had a good weekend and a good day yesterday. A lot of us are getting a lot of rain, so hope you're all staying dry. Um, and I want to welcome you to today's session for called Scholars at FIU, Data Elements and Stakeholder Analysis with Brian Cooper and David Dreisbach, returning for another session. I just want to go over a few technical issues. We at the end of the session, we will allow everyone to speak, so you can ask your questions verbally if you like. If you prefer to type them into the Q&A function, there's a Q&A function at the bottom that you can use. You can type them into there. You can raise your hand when you have a question. At the end, you let you raise your hand, and then you can, unmute yourself at that point and speak. There's also the chat, which we, use a lot, particularly for technical difficulties or issues. You can use that to talk to us on the panel. And anyways, I'm going to turn it over to David and Brian.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Brian Cooper, and as you can see,
Brian, I think you're sharing the wrong screen.
Again?
Yeah, we're seeing the presenter screen.
Well, I don't know why it reversed itself. It was working perfectly before. I think I'm going to have to log out and log back in. Still the problem, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let me start sharing again.
So yeah, we see, I think, the right screen, but we see, yep. It's perfect.
Except I'm not seeing my screen right. Okay. Okay, how's that? Still working?
Perfect.
Okay, sorry for that, everyone. Okay, again, good morning. I'm Brian Cooper, and as you can see, I work at Florida International University. Currently, I serve as principal investigator in collaboration with my colleague David Dreisbach on a technology fee grant titled Vivo at FIU, a student and faculty scholarly networking and discovery platform. This 3-year project has allowed us to build scholars at FIU. But before I present on today's topic, I want to share a few things about Florida International University. In recent years, FIU was listed as a great college to work for in the Chronicle of Higher Education and made Forbes magazine's list of America's best large employers. By 2018-19, our enrollment count had us at the 4th largest public university in the US. With such growth, I can say we have adapted to the thrill of rapid change. And it is fitting that the FIU tagline of the past 10 years in Star Trekian fashion is to be worlds ahead. Moreover, as you see in the footer, We are encouraged to think differently, go beyond what is expected, and to do something great with the opportunity we are given. I'm pleased to be part of such an exciting university in my service as Associate Dean for Engagement and Innovation in the FIU Libraries. I'll finish this self-introduction by touching on another project I've been fortunate to work on, one we're calling i360XR, that is made possible our becoming the first university in the Southeast to construct a full 360-degree video and virtual reality facility using technologies from the UK company Igloo Vision and the German audio company Sennheiser. In short, my overall work history includes authoring diverse grant and other funding proposals, and to date, I've received $3.8 million in grant and other subsidies, including for cross-institutional projects. So feel free to reach out anytime if you'd like to collaborate. Now, about scholars at FIU. We use Vivo, open source software available at duraspace.org/Vivo. And I encourage anyone interested in using the platform to visit the Duraspace site, whose URL is at the upper right-hand corner of this slide. I also welcome you to visit our FIU Scholars site that was soft launched last fall at scholars.fiu.edu. An extremely compressed history of Vivo starts back in 2003, when Cornell University started coding the system. 7 years later, Mike Conlon, who spoke last week, became PI of a Vivo NIH grant for $12.2 million. Unfortunately, at the time, the FIU libraries were not able to participate, owing to our staffing needs, and we were in the process of launching bPress's selected works. Our then focus was also on growing the institutional repository using Digital Commons. However, by 2015, the libraries and the Office of Research and Economic Development, ORED, were again thinking about experts and research information management systems. This occurred at roughly the same time I heard from sales reps from Thomson Reuters about their Insights product and how it could be utilized to support library collection planning. This led to thinking about how to use Web of Science metadata to showcase faculty scholarship to the world. It was not long before David and I met and started talking about the potential of a new research information management system for FIU. David and I also collaborated on developing a cross-unit working group to break down data silos on campus and share data to benefit all units. And at roughly the same time, our IR department helped set up an RSS feed to the ORED website. Then in 2017, we collaborated on the tech fee grant proposal and we were funded. And today FIU is committed to Vivo and is one of 140 institutions in over 25 countries who are Vivo adopters. So what is Vivo and what is it not? I'll let everyone read this slide that includes select abilities of Vivo while I quickly speak to data structures that make it all possible and point out that you can go to the Lyrasis link in the lower right-hand corner to see a more exhaustive list of what Vivo can do. First, to make these data associations you see, Vivo uses RDF, the Resource Description Framework, as a metadata structure, which also is used by the Library of Congress's BibFrame. Each data point in Vivo has a related URI, a Uniform Resource Identifier that is similar to a URL, but it includes a file name and path to get information in a directory. Vivo also uses linked data statements generated for every association of information. In other words, data points are arranged and explained semantically in what is called a triple, with a subject, a predicate, and an object. A very simple example of a triple statement is John teaches history. The use of such logic can easily be processed and combined in new ways by computers with minimal human mediation. Another way to understand triple encoded data is that a predicate forms what are called edges between nodes of data. The subject and objects, John and history, are the data nodes, while teaching is the edge between the data points. As mentioned in my previous talk, the resulting graph type database is what makes Vivo so powerful and flexible in an era of exponential data formation and growth. In short, with Vivo, any type of data can be interwoven in unique ways. Under an associated person, publications can be linked to grants, teaching can be linked to scholarship, and grant and paper collaborators can be visualized together. End users can find campus resources and services through new routes of individual discovery not possible before. Additional data points include our plan to add research facilities and the people associated with them. Also data sets and patents, which can be seen as the origin and the end of the research process. So what is Vivo not? It is not a traditional relational database. It also is not a system of record for our university, which means that those who manage the systems of record at FIU are likely to syndicate data to us, and hence our provider stakeholders. Our use of Vivo is not for any government or other compliance. However, Vivo and other expert systems often end up being of tremendous use to colleges and schools by way of providing data needed for accreditation reports and team visits. Also, it is not a system of compliance for or designed to manage open access material. However, it can be integrated with IR processes to create a powerful synergy to drive faculty use of your institutional repository. But more on that a bit later. How might we best define data elements as related to project success? Wikipedia recognizes an academic definition of data, whereby data are simply units of information. This is true, but there is a popular idea that it is the contextualization of data that really renders data as information, and hence the most valuable resource. This reflects what I said about data curation 2 weeks ago, and how new juxtapositions of data lead to the adding value mission, and hence success of an expert system. Equally, building good relationships with data contributors and seeing them as stakeholders is essential to sustainability. How do we best define stakeholders, and what is stakeholder analysis? A project management blog in Wikipedia helps with a basic definition. And stakeholders for an expert system can include varying groups, internal and external to the university. These groups either have or likely will have an interest in scholars at FIU, or might otherwise be impacted by the actions of building and maintaining an expert system. Group classifications can include 1, the institutional stakeholders who contribute select data to scholars at FIU. 2, external stakeholders providing services, largely those vendors who become our project partners. 3, external Vivo universities and the open source community. 4, a broadly defined external and business or nonprofit community that FIU interacts with. And 5, a number of different nascent or temporarily defined stakeholders. Those stakeholders yet to begin or those that are just getting started. So stakeholder analysis can and should be occurring regularly whenever you consider the needs of or communicate with groups or individuals who show interest. And I want to share that analysis of stakeholders can take many forms. There can be assessments as snapshots in time, including analysis to build a team, or for planning regular communications to launch a project. Ongoing analysis of stakeholders can become part of the day-to-day navigating of decisions. This can be seen as part of an agile development approach, first iterated by a software development team almost 20 years ago. Instead of strictly defined planning over months, an emphasis can be on incremental delivery, team collaboration, and ongoing learning and design instead of rigid project structures and waypoints. Moreover, working with vendors who are in tune with a more holistic approach can be of great benefit for smaller initial expert system management teams, as is the case with me and Dave. Conversely, if you need to be overly prescriptive with expectations and long-term detailed planning, including lockstep accomplishments that occur with hard target dates, you need to be a much more rigid team, and your institutional culture must be so aligned. As in my talk 2 weeks ago, it also helps to reference the OCLC report, Practices and Patterns in Research Information Management. Select survey information, as presented in this particular bar graph, details stakeholders based on primary RIM project responsibilities. And OCLC makes clear how the shape of the stakeholder landscape is different based on geography and politics, where a RIM system resides. In the US and Canada, you can see the bulk of responsibility for RIM activities reside with an institutional library and research office, which is what has occurred to date at FIU. These could be seen as primary stakeholders. However, other universities are choosing to implement expert systems in different ways. And I think greater participation, for example, by academic units will likely be very important for long-term success and sustainability for US institutions than what is reflected here. As an example, I mentioned Texas A&M's hybrid Vivo model 2 weeks ago, and they're using symplectic elements, which we also are deploying. Texas has a very high success rate through their faculty academic unit involvement, so it does not appear the US-Canada bar graph of 9% comes close to reflecting Texas's stakeholder environment, where the large majority of faculty are contributing to their experts' profiles. And what can make an expert system more friendly to faculty involvement? One thing is to gather existing data from different institutional silos so that faculty have less or no duplicative effort. This is an example I Googled up a number of years ago from another Vivo university, Colorado at Boulder. Finding and building such maps can help imagine scholarly related data moving to and from, for example, an existing IR and a Vivo system, from ORCID to Vivo, and also how electronic indices, in this case, Boulder's use of the American Psychological Association, likely specifically PsycInfo, was used to create faculty citation curation easier and make it more accurate. The discovery of this Boulder visualization also paralleled Dave's and my pulling together a group of individuals from various units at FIU, essentially a data sharing working group, to discuss data syndication and data quality in general across the FIU units, and how all areas might work together to help each other and larger institutional success. Also, 2 weeks ago, I mentioned our vendor partners, and now our most recent vendor stakeholders are Symplectic Elements and Elsevier, who now join our core partner Clarivate and their products Insights and Web of Science and their Vivo developer. The Elements user interface and use of APIs to help disambiguate faculty citation data was particularly appealing to us, as well as their high ranking in the OCLC survey. Here you see the APIs they have unified to help faculty and their proxies easily curate citation data, in which we push to scholars at FIU. As you can see, Elements will help us combine Scopus, Web of Science, PubMed, MLA, ORCID, SSRN, and other key index data in the single user interface. And to get to the idea of the types of data elements from both faculty and student contributors that we expect to grow, here are our current Vivo classifications of scholarship in scholars at FIU. We believe the detail will assist individuals looking to find, among other things, information for reports supporting external research assessments, such as accreditation teams, access points leading to various types of scholarship for those looking for mentors, access to publications for analysis to build a team, information reflecting societal and community impact of FIU, links to possible project collaborators, current and potential, and points for press and business to discover and contact FIU expertise, and more. We also provide searchable facets for units within FIU. Now, to build our system, our initial stakeholders came from the data sharing working group, including the counts of individuals you see on the left side of this slide. On the right are some additional stakeholders, either added to the kickoff team or added later. As mentioned, the Office of Research is a primary stakeholder that makes possible scholars at FIU's access to PeopleSoft data and grants research data possible. The stakeholders from the library team have included our scholarly communications librarian, who has been instrumental in promoting ORCID to faculty at FIU, and our institutional repository and digital library staff, who have helped provide thesis and dissertation metadata. Our library computer systems department has helped with advice, and in particular with API use to help us share data between silos, especially through a custom API, allowing us to pull citation and other faculty data out of the Provost Office Faculty Annual Review System for loading to scholars. Provost Office staff overseeing FIU's Faculty Annual Reporting System, Panther 180, is another stakeholder group wanting to make life easier for FIU faculty while supporting repurposing of faculty data. Our FIU Department of Analysis and Information Management, AIM, also has been key through their focus on data for assessment and strategic planning, and they're using Insights and in the future Scopus data that we have helped acquire through our grant funding. We also have stakeholders in our university IT department who assist us with our cloud servers for scholars at FIU. And last but far from least, MAST at FIU provides gifted dual enrollment high school student interns who have helped with data modeling and Python programming. And here are our past and present important vendor stakeholders and some colleagues from Texas A&M and Duke University who have helped us in many ways. I must also mention as stakeholders a now former VP of Interfolio, a principal in the original Data 180, the company that merged with Interfolio, named Scott Weimer. It was Scott who worked with me and built as an API toolkit that allowed our library systems team to begin pulling select data out of our faculty review system run by the Provost Office. And it is this capability that will save faculty time in citation approval for loading into scholars at FIU. Also, the Elsevier team has been instrumental in helping us find solutions, including how to best leverage Scopus to benefit our FIU stakeholders within our budget. And the Clarivate team, we would be nowhere without their technical and company support. One thing I want to share is what I recall from the 2 conferences I've attended previously on RIM systems. One was the Vivo conference, the other, the first National Expert System Conference. And that is for an expert system to work well with external community engagement, it can at times require mediation if an expert system is truly going to succeed in delivering the needed contact information. In other words, it might require staff to help navigate the challenge of someone outside academia finding an expert to reach out to. One prime reason is that academic vocabularies and words used in titles of research can be vastly different from the vocabulary of the public. Now, before I wrap up, I want to cover some final brief examples of how we've integrated stakeholders. First, our IR. Our digital commons historically has not had an API. That means we needed to use OAI PMH to generate exports that are then manually modeled in spreadsheets. The administrator of the IR provides the exports, allowing, in this case, both faculty committee service to be recorded in Scholars at FIU, as well as the metadata for the theses and dissertations of students. I've also been working on building a relationship with bpress, another vendor stakeholder, who has agreed to create an API to help us. But so far it is an asynchronous API and not one that will allow fully computerized updates or automated transfer of data to and from the IR and Scholars at FIU. Still, we're very happy to have any API over using OAI PMH, as the former allows for chronological data pulls for regular updating in the future. So we're very appreciative of bpress making that possible. About faculty photos as a data element. Before we decided to go with symplectic elements, photo curation was a labor-intensive process. Our FIU provider stakeholder we thought would be media services, an arm of IT that takes professional photos of faculty. But we found that there was no centrally maintained repository for faculty photos. Instead, the photographers provided the photos back to the faculty and the webmasters of each department. Hence, we needed to use interns from MAST at FIU and a volunteer work study student to manually curate photos from each school and college website, assemble in spreadsheets for processing, and load to Scholars at FIU. But in the future, we've also made arrangements with the media services department, and they are now collecting photos as they take them, and they can send them to us as a bulk file. A word about our IT stakeholder and the Scholars at FIU server. We rely on Amazon Web Cloud servers to keep us up and running, and it has just happened that our IT department had a new interest in offering cloud services to FI units when we needed to spin up our server, and we were one of the first to use AWS. And to conclude, I want to bring forth one final OCLC survey slide. Here you will see the global reasons for an institution creating RIM or expert systems. As mentioned, Vivo does not handle the first 2 reasons, but it is clearly situated to support the 3rd, 4th, and 5th reasons. These are supporting institutional research, reputation, and decision-making, improving services for researchers, and supporting expertise discovery. But it is research, reputation, and decision-making that Dave and I feel gives our system a boost of essential support and sustainability, and it has allowed us to attend important strategic planning sessions at FIU. In particular, we have joined Compass meetings. Compass stands for Communication Protocol for Accountability and Strategic Support, and the planning is led by the Vice President for Regional Locations and attended by all the deans and support staff. At these meetings, we've been able to demonstrate how Scholars at FIU can help in the promotion of reputation, which can help FIU advance in national and international rankings. Last but far from least, at Compass meetings, we've been able to showcase the value of library vendor partners, especially through the products of Scopus, Web of Science, and Insights and SciVal, to assist with strategic planning, while showcasing the related data sets that we are modeling into Scholars at FIU. In short, our ability to support institutional reputation and strategic decision-making is key to our sustainability, along with the student stakeholders I mentioned 2 weeks ago. So with that, I thank you, and I'll turn it over to David.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, I'm going to share my screen. All right. So do you see it okay?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
All right, perfect. Thank you. And thank you, Brian, and thank you everyone for attending. I appreciate another session you all attending today. You know, Brian and I had talked again about how we would prepare for this, and we felt that it was good also again to present some, you know, from the library perspective and the research office perspective, which I'm coming from. And so you could see how some of the shared methodologies and principles that we've developed together. I think Brian has probably been my largest stakeholder as we've been working together, you know, hand in hand over the last 5 or 6 years. And I think that's extremely important. And, you know, if you hadn't dialed into the session that we had a couple weeks back with Chris Barnes at University of Florida, you know, we dove pretty deeply there about the importance of data curation in these projects and the importance of, you know, ultimately the importance of managing stakeholders was one of the most important aspects of doing effective data curation. So today, you know, the goal of what I'll be presenting today is to dive deeper on the stakeholder analysis aspect of it, because it is, like I said, critical for ultimately the overall success of the project and successful, you know, for many aspects of the project. Today, the session's titled Scholars at FIU, Data Elements and Stakeholder Analysis. And the idea is that every university will have their own unique circumstances and set of systems and people and circumstances at the moment. So what I'll do is start by giving you some context. I'll give you some context on where FIU has come from. I'll talk a little bit about FIU, similar to how Brian had done, talk a little bit about myself, and then give you a historical retrospective on how we got to where we are at FIU today. Then I'll dive a little bit deeper into some stakeholder analysis tools and techniques, specifically that I think you can use, and we'll cross-reference that with some of the data that we have in Scholars today. So with that being said, it's important if you're considering your initiatives to really, before you get into all the stakeholder analysis, and do a project like this, it's really critical that you understand the environment you're working in. So I do think it is important to put in a slide about FIU. You know, if you can see here, we consider ourselves Miami's public research university focused on student success. So if you unpack that sentence a little bit, you know, from a Miami standpoint, you know, we opened in 1972 on an abandoned airfield in Miami with about 5 buildings. And today, and the picture you see on the left-hand side of the bottom, that used to be that building there used to be the airport control tower for the abandoned airfield. And we had about 5,000 students, and many of those students were from Miami-Dade County, I think 83% of them. And many of them were working full-time and also studying full-time. So as Brian mentioned earlier, you know, now we have over 55,000 students, but it is important, you know, in our mission that we continue to add value to the local community. Also, research is part of being Miami's public research university, is an essential element of our mission, and it's an also essential element of what drives scholars at FIU. It's, you know, we're proud of the R1 category Carnegie classification that we have and all of the activities that are happening on campus today. And student success, with over 55,000 students, we have over 190 undergraduate and graduate programs. So we have an extremely diverse population from Miami, and we have a lot of you know, emphasis by the administrative office on student success. So with those ideas in mind, it's important when you're putting together and you're conceptualizing, for us, it was critical for us to put student success as part of our proposal. Now also rankings, you know, we consider ourselves a top 50 public institution, and by the US News World Report and the Washington Monthly. And that's important also in terms of selling the project, how important it is for building reputation. And if you look forward now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I came to FIU back in 2004. At that time, I was not very familiar with FIU. I'd come from the north, and I was not familiar, Northeast. I was not very familiar with FIU. But over time, I started to notice there was all these parking decals amongst all of the people in Miami-Dade County. And I decided at that point to start working at FIU. And initially the first 10 years or so, I started working primarily on a lot of the core administrative systems at the institution with PeopleSoft. So the financial systems, HR systems, campus systems. And then I eventually worked within the research office. In the research office, we took a lot of our processes from paper-based, pre-award, post-award. And it wasn't really until about 2013 or so that the vice president for research had come to me and asked, well, now that we've got a lot of these administrative systems in place, we're looking for an expert profiling system. And it just so happened around that time period, I had been taking the project management professional certification. And in retrospect, and part of what you'll see today, some of the things that I think you can apply are definitely, pure project management skills. So if you are endeavoring into something like this, I recommend that you try to get studied up a bit. You don't have to be an expert, but there's definitely some tools that I'll touch upon today that may be very helpful for you. So that's a little bit of background on myself. And as mentioned, this all started really for me, from my perspective, when the vice president was looking for research development purposes, obviously the key areas that we had within the research office. So like other system implementations that I've done in the past, usually just do an environmental scan to see what's out there external to the institution. Then, by doing that, I also found there was this Wikipedia site. I remember back then there was probably 50 or 60 or 70 different systems that were out there. So I remember studying that just to get a feel. And I realized quickly that there wasn't really just one solution out there. There was a few different options. But again, back to FIU circumstances, it really was a matter of seeing what would be the best match, for FIU's current circumstances. I also, during that time period, reached out to a number of institutions, which I think is an important element for you all if you're considering your direction going forward. Reach out to FIU, reach out to other institutions that are doing it well, and learn from them, because you're not always going to find that type of information from within your institution. So that's one of the things that we did early on. And also at that time period, when assessing the internal environment to FIU, we had a homegrown system called Sourcebook that I mentioned 2 weeks ago that didn't really have a lot of data in it. We had a lot of different faculty profiling systems that, not profiling systems, directories on each individual college website. We had, as Brian mentioned, Digital Commons bpress. And then we also had the usage of academic analytics by some administration, and also Panther 180, which was the product that Brian mentioned from Interfolio. That was really in the beginning of its launch. So looking at all of this back then, the one thing you could definitely tell was, and I'm sure you all can relate to this, is that, there's a lot of concurrent initiatives that involve the same data elements and the same stakeholders, right? So, the way from a project management standpoint, after, doing this scanning, the next step was to create a project charter. A project charter, if you're not familiar with this, from a project management standpoint, I put the definition up there from the PMBOK guide, which is the body of knowledge for project management. But more or less, it's a document that you would put together to initiate any project that lays out essentially the vision for the project and helps you go through and analyze what will be this project in the future, what are its goals. Before you spend any money, it helps you think through what you want to get out of the implementation. So the core elements that we had in this project charter, and it also governs the project throughout its life cycle. We had an executive summary, a basic project purpose, success criteria. So what does that mean? One success criteria is that it would be on a modern technology, and also that it wouldn't burden faculty. So you just put these things down on paper. You also start thinking through who stakeholders will be. And in that process, you start reaching out to people across the institution, try to get a further understanding. At that point, I had never worked with the library extensively. in the context of multiple meetings and so forth, and trying to conceptualize from my own perspective what this project would be, you end up meeting, I think, a lot of the key people across the institution to get a feel for what their interests are. And as part of that, you can also build out a corollary to that is something called a stakeholder register. And this is, again, another one of these project management tools and techniques that you can use. There's not one particular format for it. I think you could build it for yourself, but just to give you an idea of what we captured up early on is just a basic spreadsheet. If you can see here, we had basic information, the name of a person, title, the area of the institution that they're coming from. You can see here we have how the Scholars Project can help them in their role and how can they help the project. Capture if they had any maybe particular concerns about the project. Prioritize somewhat and rank some of your stakeholders. Think about how you would communicate with them. Do they have any very specific requirements? Just general comments. And sometimes when you're doing stakeholder analysis, it's normal to measure the amount of interest and influence that stakeholder may have. So this is something you can go through up front to start thinking through. I think you may know, and we've talked about these in probably many of these sessions, that it could be your office of research or library, but the more you look at this and the more you go and do that pre-work, the richer your project charter will be, and many of the subsequent outputs of your project will be. So after doing these initial project charters and stakeholder analysis and scanning the environment, I think the key resolution really was there's so much stuff going on that we need to have regular meetings that Brian mentioned earlier, a working group to start talking about how we can together start coordinating some of these scholarly data initiatives. So with that, we started the Scholarly Data Working Group in 2016, 2017. As Brian mentioned earlier, had representation from the Office of Research, AIM, and we're still continuing to develop the group there, to be even more decentral. This diagram you see here was just a diagram that we came up with back then related to some of the key research administration systems that we have. And it's really as a result of those collaborative discussions that, Brian and I really started working very closely together, and we wrote the tech fee grant. So his expertise and my expertise was like a perfect match that we were able to put together something that's compelling, that looked at all the stakeholders that we've been talking to. And that's essentially how we got into the tech fee grant that we have today. So that's a lot about the history and how we got to where we are and how you can use a project charter and a stakeholder register and these types of things to manage your stakeholders. But I wanted to talk a bit about, generally speaking, how you can look at stakeholders for these types of systems. So from an internal perspective, you have staff, faculty, and students, and I think that's probably pretty obvious. But as you analyze each one of these, you can and you should, throughout the life of the project, get more granular. Think about the type of faculty. Think about the different perspectives where they are in their career path. If you have a postdoc, it's going to be a different engagement that you're going to have potentially with an eminent scholar at your institution. You have staff that are helping those faculty and students, and many different types of staff in different positions, and they support many processes. So you have to use these tools to maybe drive a little bit granular and just, recognize that, your success for your project may be, having a very successful usage of it in the academic advising area or for the orientation for students. And then last but not least is the students, which is the foundation of, the tech fee proposal that we writ around student success. So we've, throughout the life of our project, been very conscientious to think about undergraduate students, graduate students, honor students, where would be the appropriate approach to engage them. And they've been very critical for us. In fact, the tech fee proposal that we have for the future, we've had a number of students give really good feedback about how this has helped them maybe connect with somebody on campus or an activity that they would have never been aware of. And as Brian mentioned, we have a number of organizations that within the institution that, we have on our radar, some more than others, but nonetheless, each one, it's worth thinking through and thinking how you engage them. And one important point is that not every one of these organizations is going to be necessarily who you're going to engage at every stage or in the beginning. For instance, some areas we may not want to engage until a little bit later, until we have something. But I think it goes without saying that for an expertise system, the Office of the President is an important stakeholder, because it could be a very powerful tool for the goals of the President's office. External relations, we've been working very closely with them to try to see how we can connect the news stories that they produce to the expertise that's in our systems, as well as work with them on a practical standpoint with their staff on how they could use the system to respond to media requests. We have an Office of Engagement that worked very closely with the local Miami community that we've engaged in the past about the system and how that could be useful for them and the meetings that they go to and so forth. Obviously, the Office of the Provost is a very important stakeholder for us, and they have multiple departments within the Office of Provost. Your Analysis Information Management, which is kind of like the IR department for the university. Faculty Leadership and Success, which is around career development. Planning and Finance is the area that manages the Panther 180 system that Brian talked about earlier. And then Academic and Career Success is a department that's really focused on student success initiatives and measuring. So each one of these areas we have dialogue going on with, and we have different relationships that we're building with them initially and ongoing. Student Affairs, student government is, like I mentioned, is critical to bring into the loop to some extent. And then Enrollment Management is a department that is really on the front line with students when it comes to advising and so forth. And then on the right-hand side here, you have the ones you would always think about, the libraries, the research office, the graduate school, the central IT office. Colleges and schools could be its own presentation in and of itself. Centers and institutes, I think that's also a very important element, because what you get in a scholar's system or an expertise system is really that ability to analyze cross-disciplinary activity, and individuals and centers and institutes can be great advocates for you as you try to promote the benefits of an expertise system on your campus. Faculty Senate is another group at FIU that we've engaged to get their feedback and learn from them about what will be best for faculty. And then obviously University Advancement. From a donor perspective, it's good that the University Advancement Office is aware that this tool could be used by their staff to help find people on campus with certain expertise. And then as Brian mentioned earlier, this Regional Academic Locations and Institutional Development Office is one in which leads the campus activity. So those strategic discussions that happen on campus, we've partnered with them as well too. So all of this doesn't happen overnight. It's really more of a perspective that you have to have when you're executing the project to appreciate that. This slide will take you just at a high level of those different types of stakeholders outside of the institution that you would want to think about. And I think earlier there was some examples given. Commercial vendors are a critical partnership that you want to build because you're not going to have everything necessarily on your own day one, and they can definitely, with good relationship building with them, get the best of the products that they have and fit them in with what works for your unique institutional circumstances. I think the research information management community, I would say the organizations like ORCID, you all that are here for your other institutions reaching out, I think that's important for you to do that type of review of who can help you. Scholars, an expertise system also, it's really important to think about how this could be used by prospective faculty, prospective students to the institution. You want to tailor the product that you're producing in the expertise system to those audiences as well too. That's what will make people aware, like myself. If I was not aware of FIU, this is the type of system that can enable that discovery. We also have, former faculty and staff and the former faculty that have produced tremendous scholarship. We don't want to lose that within our expertise system. We still want people to connect to FIU with all of the history that we have as an institution. As I mentioned, donors, alumni. I put here also integrated technologies is another important stakeholder. It's not a person per se, it's more of a system and technologies that you want to make sure that whatever you're doing can integrate with the technologies of the future. So whether that be machine learning, linked data is one of the key things that we really like about the Vivo platform, but it is, when you talk about external to your institution, something you should think about. Also, very importantly, the local and global community and how scholars can be used or your expertise system can be used when those local and global community members are looking to FIU for solutions. And also judging FIU and ranking us essentially, because a significant component of rankings is based on reputation surveys. So keeping in mind rankings, reputation, and then last but not least, the external stakeholder of governmental organizations. There's definitely a lot of use cases when you're thinking about how you can implement your expertise systems that apply to that group of stakeholders, which are very important to your administrative and your faculty and so forth, that are doing a lot of things on your campus. So, and then I also wanted to take a quick sort of high level look at the different data elements that we have either ingested or in the process of ingested and think about those a bit by stakeholder type. So as Brian mentioned earlier, in this slide we did in a previous one on data curation, you have teams, awards, funding agencies here on the left-hand side. And that was really the Office of Research, myself, working, to provide that information. But obviously within the research office, I need to work with different areas in the research office to make sure that we put the right type of information out. We have organizations, so that's important, at least within our institution. The provost office is a key stakeholder there, the library, the research office, because everybody's doing reporting on organizations. But I think the academic affairs to me or the office of the provost is going to be one, or the office of the president may be the best to help. And frankly, looking at the websites of the institution can help you kind of confirm that organizational structure. And we talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Positions and people, that's again, a lot of stakeholders within the institution, potentially your faculty affairs office, your HR office, the faculty themselves, and the data that's associated with them. We talked about photos, there could be different stakeholders that you may not have imagined that can really help you pull people data. And so for instance, courses and syllabi, we ended up reaching out to our student affairs office. So thinking about stakeholders across different perspectives, publications and other scholarly output, obviously, the library, but is going to be critical. Brian's been tremendous in helping us navigate our different options at FIU. But every college, as you reach out to them, may have their own individual circumstances. So you really have to, like I said, consider these things not just once, but as you implement. And then we also have technologies available for licensing on the right-hand side. And that, again, for us, that rolls up within our Office of Research in Economic Development. But, so I recommend you think about the data elements you want to get and then analyze the stakeholders back from the data elements as well. That's another strategy you can use. So in summary, I think this could be summarized into that doing stakeholder identification and analysis activities are critical to the initial and ongoing success of an expertise system. Depending on what you're trying to do at what stage of the project will dictate a lot of who you engage with and how do you communicate with them. And then more specifically, if you weren't sure how to get started, you may want to take an attempt at a project charter or stakeholder register. The only thing it costs is your time to think through it, but definitely be happy to give you any guidance and feedback if you had any questions after the session. And with that, pretty much done the presentation and wanted to leave it open for questions now. So oops, let me stop sharing my screen. All right.
So I'm busy trying to allow everybody to talk, but
Okay.
but hopefully some, you know, you can also raise your hand if you want to, or post a question on the Q&A. Okay, everybody should be allowed to talk now. So I have a question, David. Which stakeholders were the most difficult to convince that this was actually something in their interest?
The most difficult ones to convince, you know, I think the challenges is around burden of faculty. I think they can be challenging, and from my perspective, because what they're typically getting exposed to is just a lot of burden and redundancy. You know, so it's easy to say that you're going to create another system for them, but you know, it's hard to necessarily sell them on it unless you also convince them that it's not going to be, it's going to represent them well, and also not take a lot of their effort. You know, I think that's, to me, because they're ultimately the heart of a lot of the data that you're trying to need and cultivate to make the system successful. So I would say that that to me is the one that stands out, that, you know, you have to really work to convince that it will be successful. I don't know what you think, Brian.
I think that time will tell. We basically just had our soft launch this past fall. It got a lot of initial buzz, and in fact, the vice president for regional locations said his cell phone was burning up after a one Compass meeting where Scholars at FIU was announced. But I think we're at the point that we're really just beginning to broadly market the system, and we expect that to ramp up considerably with the user interface from Elements that we're deploying. So I think at that point in time, we're going to get a better feel for you know, areas of resistance or concern. But otherwise, I agree with Dave. You know, we've been aware for a long time that, you know, faculty have expressed concerns about, you know, well, you made me into the data here and now we're having to do it again somewhere else. So that is, I think, the biggest potential obstacle, and why we've spent so much time trying to find ways to gather the data for the faculty with minimal effort on their part.
I would also say that depending on the data element that you look at and you try to see what's going on campus, it's not always easy to get the best data out there. And I think that because there's so many projects that are going on, and you know, to get something out there, sometimes, you know, like, you have to build your relationships with those people. And I think ultimately, I think the principle of sharing data is I think an important element of this as we engage with our faculty. No, I'm sorry, the data providers that we have on campus. Ultimately, you know, we want to, you know, be seen as a layer that can connect people to their data source on campus as well too. So I think that's another piece that is critical, getting the data there, but working with people that may have data, and it may require them some work to change what they've been doing historically for a public purpose, where their data may be currently used for internal purposes only.
So Carol Ann posted a question. Which stakeholders are the most excited and most active users of the system?
So, do you want to take this, Brian?
Yeah, I can, sure, I can start.
Yeah.
I think so far, the faculty have shown the most excitement or interest in it. at this point in time, the emails that we've received, coming from the scholars.fiu.edu website, has basically been all faculty contacting us, asking how they can, in some cases, enhance their profile. So it gives us the opportunity to tell them about our plans for the future, and to be prepared to provide support in that. I think too that, well, I'll leave it at that for now, but it's really the faculty at this point.
Yeah, I would say that the research office, we definitely have interest there from the leadership, from development perspective, team building, trying to put together proposals and trying to find the right people. And I think that also from a faculty standpoint, the early career investigators, postdocs, like I said earlier, the centers and institutes, those that are trying to get their name out there and even analyze the data within this system. To me, those are stakeholders that we've found. But as Brian mentioned earlier, we still haven't really fully communicated out everything, because we're still putting a little bit more infrastructure in place that will allow them to get more data in the system and disambiguate themselves and so forth. So we should know more about the students coming up this fall. I think there's going to be, it's going to be interesting over the next 6 months, really.
Yeah, and we're going to be looking at Google Analytics for the site, and doing some kind of deep dives into the data and who we see are the users in that fashion as well.
So what is your next, other than the marketing part, what other kind of are your priorities going forward that you want to work on?
So I think that we feel like we've gotten to the point where we have created something that has an excellent amount of linked data in it. I think mentioning the rollout, and like you mentioned, like the marketing aspect of it, and building out some key features around disambiguation and getting a lot more data in there is obviously right on our radar right now. But I also think it's going to be important for us to be able to share data out of the system in the future, and be able to facilitate some of the manual data entry that's happening across our campus. So I think that's another way that, it's not just about a search site. It's about making the data discoverable and linked to other entities on campus, that they'll be happy to have a nice faculty directory that is up to date and accurate and disambiguated by the faculty member.
Yeah. We're also interested in more feedback from faculty in particular. This includes librarians. I'm working with the head of our information and research services at the Green Library, and some of the librarians will be giving us feedback about how the profiles for faculty might need to be tweaked for their faculty story. And we're also working with a faculty senate committee, and there are individuals on that committee who are particularly interested in giving us feedback as we develop the future user interface, and as well as faculty who in some cases might have a story to tell that maybe doesn't fit in fully with the array of APIs and indices that we're going to be pulling data from. So we have to be sensitive to really trying to make this system work for all people.
Okay, we have a question on the chat. What part of Scholars at FIU are faculty most excited about? Altmetrics, finding collaborators, repositories of their work, or some other?
I think about it, maybe in the future we'll have a faculty member on to give the perspective directly, but I'm going to think, based on what I've seen, I think well, obviously they're interested in seeing an excellent profile of themselves, but really when the search they do, able to see when you put in a keyword, the results of people that they didn't know about that may have been working on something, in another college completely, and this is their initial way to come up with a short list of people. The alt metrics, I think, was mentioned in the question. I think that resonates a lot with, I think, definitely people that are trying to tell the story and measure impact and how much a publication may have been cited and so forth, or tweeted and so forth. So I like that one a lot. But yeah, the faculty, I think being able to find other faculty members, I think, is what resonates with me the most.
Yeah, I think that's tops as well. And I think we've also heard from some faculty, and I think Dave in particular, you might have mentioned this, that one faculty was particularly enthusiastic about getting credit for the work that she did on thesis and dissertation committees. So there's a lot of data elements, you know, beyond just the raw scholarship and the citations that really tell the whole story of how faculty are integral to FIU's success. And I think there was a positive response on that.
The visualizations are also pretty good in the sense that not only do they help you find somebody that shows up with a keyword, but they also, when you look at that person's profile, see who they're working with. So, or who they're writing a paper with, or who they were a co-investigator on a grant on. So you get an idea of the network of people. So they may know one person, but to get a feel for who they're collaborating with, I think is another scenario that people have used it a lot.
All right. Another question is, in a technical aspect, what technologies did you guys use to build the tool? For example, 3D.js for data visualization.
Yeah, I'd have to look back at, there's a fairly extensive architecture that's, you know, part of the Vivo community. So I'm not quite sure what element within the architecture they're using to visualize some of the data within Vivo. But we're basically relying upon what the Vivo community has already produced.
Yeah, I mean, the core application is Java based, but I think it's, yeah, be some sort of JavaScript library that I think is going to be used for it. But the link that Brian put around the DuraSpace site on one of his slides, I think you can get exactly to that information. You know, there's all the technical details are there.
Okay, do we have any more questions? Anyone want to speak up or? All right then. Well, very good. Well, thank you both very much. That was very, very helpful. I've got lots of ideas for our system from y'all. So I want to thank you again. And you know, looking forward to seeing everybody next week. We're going to see David and Brian back again next week. The session is Challenges and Successes in Building an Expertise System, Human and Financial Cost. We'll also have on the panel Chris Barnes, Peggy Wright Cleveland, and Tiffany Phillips.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.